And we are live. Welcome to Olivia's Stories, ladies and gentlemen. The one very mistake I made ruined my life and my marriage. I didn't know that this mistake could mess things up for me. My husband caught me with his boss, and he didn't think twice before taking out his revenge on me. I take full accountability for my actions, but he just went too far with his revenge. He shouldn't have acted the way he did. His revenge was just too cruel. My husband perfectly planned everything and waited for me to fall right into his trap. I fell for it, and now I'm reaping the consequences. Hi guys, my name is Patricia, and I am a 27-year-old fast food owner. The name of my husband is Michael. He is a 30-year-old business analyst. My husband and I had been married for 3 years, but unfortunately, we're no longer together. We have known each other for a very long time. Michael was 18 years old when he and his family moved into our neighborhood. At that time, I was 15 years old. Practically, Michael and I were childhood friends. Michael and his family moved into the town at that time because they had transferred his father for work. And so, he wasn't familiar with the neighborhood. At some point then, both of us parents got closer together and made friends. But Michael and I had our own little differences and often argued over little things. Something seemed off with Michael at that time. He was not like the usual kids. He didn't like playing or associating with friends. He was always reading even when it was a holiday. Honestly speaking, Michael was an introvert. Few months after Michael and his family had moved in, Michael and I later got along. We became friends and spent time together whenever his family came over for dinner. We even attended the same high school down to college. We never dated during that period. We were just friends and neighbors. 2 years after graduation from college, Michael asked me out. I patiently waited to be his girlfriend. I liked Michael back then, but I didn't tell him because I didn't want to be turned down, and also we weren't friends. I accepted, and we dated for a year before we finally tied the knot together. The wedding was memorable, and I felt like I had made the best decision at that time. We were in love with each other. So guys, a few months after our wedding, everything moved fine, and we lived happily. We were an average couple then because we were just trying to figure out something meaningful with our lives. We planned to not take any financial assistance from our parents, and we survived each day. At that time, our parents' relationship became stronger because of our union. Despite everything then, Michael treated me nice. We went on regular dates, and he also bought me gifts. He never gave me a chance to look outside or even regret marrying him. That even brought us closer together. 1 year after our wedding, Michael got promoted at his office. He gave professional advice to the company he was working with, and also was made a personal assistant to his boss. After Michael's promotion, everything went well and we lived happily. I also opened a fast food restaurant with the help of Michael. He supported my business and came over to help me out with work anytime he was work-free. It wasn't an easy start. The first few months were challenging, but I overcame all the challenges with the help of Michael. My husband also referred his colleagues to the restaurant to either have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and they all did. One day, while I was at the restaurant sorting out the sales for the day, I got a call from Michael's mom, Trisha. I quickly picked the call and we exchanged our usual greetings. Michael's mom and I were very close. She treated me more like a daughter-in-law. Apparently, Trisha gave birth to Michael and 3 other boys, and so she took me like the daughter she never had. So guys, after our usual greetings, she told me that she was trying to plan a surprise for Michael's dad's 60th birthday. She told me that she wanted an extra hand, and I was the perfect person that would help her carry out the surprise. I was excited and told her how happy I was to help out. So I got off the phone and headed over to the house later that day. We made the necessary arrangement and set out the things we needed for the surprise. Everyone knew about the surprise except for Michael's dad, Dave. Trisha gave out a strict warning to all of us, and we all complied. 3 days later, it was Michelle's dad's birthday. The surprise really came out good. There were lots of drinks and food to eat. Everyone came with gifts, and it was a nice birthday party. Michael and I also gave him a very thoughtful gift. We all had fun. It was indeed a wonderful night, and everyone enjoyed themselves. The party ended at 10 p.m., and everyone exited the venue. My husband and I drove home together that night, and we headed to bed straight because we had a tired night. The next day, I woke up and turned to the other side of the bed, but I didn't find Mikhail as usual. He must have woken up early to go to work. I got out of bed and prepared myself to go to the restaurant. I did my morning routine and left home. I arrived at the restaurant and I saw that there were a lot of orders waiting for us. My workers and I got to work and we cleared it out. Not long after we had opened, my husband walked in with his boss, Raphael. His boss wanted to have breakfast at the restaurant that morning. My husband's boss had come over several times to have food at the restaurant. There were times he came and had food with his clients. I was used to having him around. So guys, I took out his order and one of my workers, Kate, served him. My husband also had breakfast with his boss. I sat at a corner and watched them eat. They kept talking about business, and at some point I didn't really understand what they were really discussing at that moment. A few minutes later, they were done and were ready to head out of the restaurant. Raphael left a huge tip for me because of how tasteful the food was. I declined at first, but he seemed persistent. And also, I looked at my husband to see if he was okay with it. But Michael didn't bother, and I collected it. I was very happy, and I thanked him for his generosity. We left the restaurant, and so I walked them to the car. They got into the car and drove off. Then I walked back into the restaurant and continued my work. 2 months later, it was our 3rd-year wedding anniversary. I got up very early that morning before Michael. Apparently, I had been planning on surprising him. A few minutes later, he got up. We exchanged our greetings and we told ourselves happy anniversary. I was very happy that he remembered despite his busy schedules. We got dressed and we went to our place of work. So guys, I got early from work that day because I wanted to surprise my husband. Of course, it was our 3rd year as a couple. I called him on the phone and told him to come back early, which he assured me he would. I went home and made a nice meal for. I wanted us to have dinner at home. I did everything and lighted the candles. It was a romantic dinner date just for the two of us. Not long after, my husband arrived home, and I waited at the door for him to come. Immediately, he opened the door and I yelled, "Surprise!" He was so happy to see that I had taken time to celebrate our anniversary. We hugged and headed to the dining table. Apparently, my husband got me a gift when he was coming from work. We exchanged our gifts and professed our love to each other. We then proceeded and ate our meal. We cleared the table after we had our meal and went to watch our favorite TV shows. And after a while, I slept off. I couldn't watch the movie until the end because I was very tired. The next morning, I woke up and found myself on the bed. Michael must have had a hard time taking me upstairs. I thought to myself and laughed. As usual, my husband had left early to work. I decided not to go to work that day because I wanted to visit my parents. I haven't heard from them for a while then because I was so busy with work that I hardly had time for myself. I called Michael and informed him I would be going to see my parents. He said okay and told me to come back early, which I agreed to. I went to the bathroom and had my bath, got dressed, and left. I didn't bother informing them because I was very sure they were going to be at home. Plus, I wanted my visit to be a surprise. I arrived at my parents' house 15 minutes later. Yes, it was a 15-minute journey. We were that close to each other. I got out of my car and headed to the door. I knocked a few times, but no one opened the door. Everywhere was silent and I wondered what could be wrong. I still remembered the passcode and I went inside. I got in and no one was at home and everything was neatly put in place. I took my phone and called my dad, but his lines were off. At that moment, I was scared and had bad thoughts running through my mind. I called my mom and after a few rings, she picked the phone. I asked her if everything was okay and why they weren't at home, but she said all was fine and told me not to bother myself about anything. Apparently, they went to visit a friend of theirs a few miles away from the neighborhood. So, guys, I was happy that nothing happened. Before I got off the phone with my mom, I told her I would wait for them to come back, and so I waited. A few hours later, they arrived home. I was very happy to see them, and we chatted for a while before I left and headed back home. By the time I arrived home, it was a few minutes past 6, and Michael hadn't come back at that time. I called him, and he told me he was a few minutes away from home. I went inside and freshened up and went downstairs. I thought about the things me and my mom had chatted about, and I felt happy. I had really missed them. Sometimes I feel like I haven't done enough for them. I was reminiscing about the fun I had with my mom when Michael walked in. I was startled at first because he didn't knock on the door as usual. Maybe I must have forgotten to lock it. We greeted each other and we asked ourselves about our day before he went upstairs to change. Immediately, I left to set his dinner, and I continued with what I was doing. A few minutes later, he came down to eat his meal and went back to the room. I was very curious about it because it was unlike him, and so I got up and asked him if everything was okay. He told me that he was just tired from the day's work, and so he came back to lie down. Honestly speaking, at that time he looked very tired. I also joined him in bed and we rested for the night. Michael's behavior continued for a couple of weeks, and I was becoming fed up with his constant mood swings. I decided to pressure him into telling me what was wrong with him. After much persuasion, he told me that he had been overworked by his boss for the past few months, and I was very surprised because he had told me they were not very busy at that time of the year. He then explained to me about them expanding their business and all. I saw the work was taking a huge toll on my husband, and I decided I was going to do something about it. The following day, I made up my mind that I was going to speak to Michael's boss, Raphael. I know I made the decision to do that on my own, but I needed to do something about it because my husband was grinding himself to the ground, and I knew he was not going to say anything to his boss because he loved what he did, i.e. his work. I was in the restaurant 2 days later when Michael called me about a work trip he was going on at the last minute, and I saw it as an opportunity for me to go pay his boss, Raphael, a visit. I knew I was doing the right thing because it was for the welfare of my husband. I quickly finished what I was doing and I left for their office. I got there, and every time I come here, I am very much in awe about the organization of the offices. I told his assistant I was here to see her boss, but she told me I didn't have an appointment. I tried explaining to her that I know him, but she couldn't listen to me. I gave up hope, and I was about to leave when I saw Raphael coming out from his office with a man. I quickly ran to him, and I told him about how I wanted to see him, and I didn't have an appointment. He apologized to me, and he ushered me into his office. I sat down, and I got straight to the point with him. I told him about Michael's recent poor health and how he had been overworking himself lately. Raphael put me at ease about everything, and he told me he was going to cut back Michael's working hours. At that point, I became very scared, thinking that I may have jeopardized his work, but he quickly told me that cutting back his hours doesn't mean Michael was going to lose his job. I felt relieved because I knew Michael was going to be upset if he found out that I paid his boss a visit without his knowledge. I told Raphael not to mention my visit to Michael. He agreed, and he walked me out of his office with his hand on my lower back. I felt some type of way, because he shouldn't have done that because I was the wife of his employee, and I thought they had some sort of friendship. After leaving the office, I went back home and called Michael. We talked for some time, and I found out he was feeling much better, and also he was extending his trip for a little while because his boss gave him time to rest. But I asked why he couldn't rest at our home. He replied and said he needed to be away from the city for a few weeks. I agreed to it because it can get really intense with the work they do. We said our goodbyes and I got into bed. Things were moving swiftly, guys. My husband was fine where he was and my business was moving forward. I was at the restaurant when Raphael came in with a group of men in suits. I assumed they were from his work. I asked someone to take their other and I continued with my work some hours later. I thought I should leave early and go see Trisha for a while. I was about to leave when I saw Raphael still in the restaurant, but that time he was alone. I went over to say hello, and he asked me to join him for a drink, which I accepted because I didn't want to seem rude to him. We talked about random things, and I discovered that Raphael was actually a very interesting person. He told me how he worked so hard from an early age, and because he was from a rich family, he had to work extra hard. I also told him about how Michael had worked his way up to be where he is today. I also told him it was one of the things I admired about my husband. I admired his dedication. I finished up my drink and I told Raphael I was meeting Michael's mom for dinner and I had to leave. He offered to drive me since it was late and I accepted. We talked on the way and I saw that I had misjudged Raphael because he was actually a very funny and easygoing guy behind the suits and the serious face he carried. He was so easy to talk to. He dropped me off, and we said our goodbyes. I greeted Trisha, and she kept on saying she hadn't seen me in months. I knew she exaggerated a lot, but months? We laughed over it, and we talked about Michael's recent trip, and she had asked me how I was doing without him. I told her I was coping fine. We ate, and we gossiped for a little while before I went back home. When I got home, I went straight to bed, and I made a mental note to talk to my parents the following day. I woke up the next day ready to get to work when Michael called me that his boss was coming over to the house to get some particular documents he had left behind. I knew that I was already going to be running late for work, and I decided to wait for Raphael. I was finishing up my breakfast when I heard the doorbell. I knew it was Raphael, and I invited him in. I gave him the documents, and he handed me my pair of earrings I left in his car last night. I thanked him, and I was about to lead him to the door when he begged me to make a cup of coffee for him. I agreed to do so because he was really a nice person, and he was just asking for me to do little. We continued to bond over the coffee, and Raphael kept flirting with me, and at first, I never saw it as anything serious, but it kept coming. He could tell me I was beautiful, and Michael was lucky to have me. It never meant anything to me, and I decided to overlook it. A few days later, Raphael kept visiting my restaurant, and he kept on flirting with me. There were days he could enter the restaurant and sit for hours watching me work and waiting for me to finish my work. In those days, I found the sweet side of Raphael. I got into the restaurant one morning, and I saw a bunch of flowers waiting for me on my desk. I looked at the card and discovered it was from Raphael. It brightened my day, and a few minutes later I received a call from Raphael, and we talked and he made me laugh throughout our conversation. I had to end the call because I was getting another call from my husband. I spoke to my husband not feeling guilty because I thought what was going on between me and Raphael was not that important, and there was no need for me to worry him over it. I talked to Michael about when he was coming back because I missed him, to which he said he had returned in a week's time. I was very excited because finally he was coming back and I was not going to be lonely again. A day later, Raphael asked how long it was since I went out for dinner, and I couldn't remember, to which he suggested we go out for a friendly dinner. I accepted because I thought it was harmless and all. And since it was going to take a few days before Michael returned, I decided to take him up on his offer. I got dressed and Raphael picked me up. I didn't know how he knew my favorite restaurant, but I was happy to be there. We ate and talked for a while. With Raphael, it was very easy to communicate because he always puts you at ease. I checked my time and I discovered time had passed and there were only a few people remaining at the restaurant. At that point, I was very tipsy. Raphael offered to drop me home, but I had to decline because it was really late and I didn't want to be driven for a long time. I told him to find me a hotel to sleep for the night and I could go home in the morning, but he suggested I could sleep in his guest room. I accepted and he drove us to his house. We got to his house and I knew I was tipsy because I couldn't see properly, and Raphael helped me change my clothes. One thing led to the other, and we started kissing. I didn't know what was going on in my head, but I wanted it to happen, and that was the last thing I remember before everything went blank. I woke up the next morning with a mild headache to see that I was in a strange place. Before I could make out where I was, I heard the voice of my husband, and the next thing was him standing at the door, looking at me horribly. I turned to the left and I saw Raphael naked on the bed. I saw a lot of pain in Michael's eyes, and I knew I was in trouble. I left the room without a word and I tried to get dressed and run after him, but Raphael held me back and told me to allow him to be for some time. I felt like it was not a good idea, and I got dressed quickly and went looking for Michael only to see he had left. I looked for a cab and went home looking for him, but he was not there. I kept on trying to reach Michael, but he was not answering me, and some days later Raphael came by to the restaurant, and I asked him if he knew where Michael had gone. But he didn't know I was getting irritated at that point because I wanted him to come face me and let us talk things through. A few days later, I woke up ready to start my day, and I decided not to think about everything for once and put myself first. I got to work, but my restaurant was closed. I was shocked because my employees are always early to work, and we don't close the restaurant at that hour of the morning. I got a paper served to me saying I was no longer the owner of my business because it had been sold. I thought it was a very good joke, and I started laughing. because I didn't see how it was possible. I decided to call Michael because he was the only one who could understand how I was feeling, but I couldn't reach him. I called Raphael, and he came as soon as he could. I gave him the papers with my hands shaking. Then Raphael told me after that Michael, being the legal owner of my restaurant, had sold it. I didn't want to believe him at first because I knew Michael wasn't that cruel. But I remembered what I did to him, and I couldn't hold my tears. My whole life's work had been thrown into the drain by Michael. That was the cruelest thing to do to anyone. I got home to see my things were outside with Michael standing at the door with the divorce papers. I begged him to listen to me, and I tried explaining to him that the house was mine too. But he said he had bought the house in his name. That's all he did to me. I can't believe he turned out to be a ruthless man. I'm still trying to process all that he did to me. Update. I've seen the comments, and I must say that you all are really cruel. None of you wanted to leave any stone unturned, and you made sure you crushed my pride. I guess I deserve it all. I cannot believe that I've ended up as a divorced woman who has lost everything. I thought things would charge, and I'd get back everything I've lost, but nothing like that happened. It's all gone, and it's as a result of my stupidity. At that moment, everything came crashing down on me. I had lost my restaurant, which I built with some much sweet, and I also lost my marriage, and I was homeless. It became clear to me that Michael was a cruel person who never thought of anybody but himself. This is everything he did to me, guys. I don't think I can ever recover from it. But I guess karma dealt with me.